I'll just get started now, and then people might be sort of joining in the first couple of minutes. But that's just the way these things go. I think we've just, yeah. Hi, Tuna. Thanks a lot for joining us. You're just in time. We're about to kick off. So thanks again. Thanks very much for joining me today. The sort of point of this session is to hopefully run through a few. Hi there, Gail. How you doing? The point of today's session is to really run through a little bit of extra support for you teachers have signed up in the last few weeks to run Our World with pupils at your school. So this session we did one at the beginning of the month. It was a bit more kind of informative and kind of give an overview of the project. Today's session is a bit more kind of practical and giving you some sort of tips on ways that you can implement Our World in your classroom. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll go from there. And we have had a couple of issues with the chat function on the team. So if you do have any questions, if the chat box is there and visible for you, then great, just go for it and I'll answer them at the end or as we go. But if you can't get that function, then you can save your questions for the end and we can unmute mics. But I'll get started just now then. So a very good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this career-long professional learning event run by the Scottish European Educational Trust, or SEAT, providing you with some practical teaching support for running Our World in your school. So my name's Alex. I'm the project's coordinator. I'm pretty sure I've met you all at the last session or by email at this point. But thanks a lot for giving up your time this afternoon, and I hope you find this session to be useful and hopefully interesting as well. So last time, as I said, we had a couple of difficulties, but if you can just save your questions for a bit later on, or you can email them to my colleague Jane, who's also on this discussion just now. Her email address is jane@seat.org.uk, and she can make sure that they get entered into the chat box if you're struggling to get into work that way. You'd think at this stage I'd be flying with Microsoft Teams, but the settings are a bit all over the place. Anyway, so let's quickly talk about what was requested to be included today by all of you in your project registration forms. Some of these elements came up a fair few times. So basic screen education support was mentioned, along with how you can introduce the UN Sustainable Development Goals to your class. How to storyboard came up several times, which is the kind of the bones of this presentation today. Why we use storyboarding in films, how to help pupils to be able to make storyboards independently, and how to make the process more effective and fun for pupils were all things that came up in your registration forms. How to access editing on tablets was requested by one teacher, but just to let you know that just due to time restrictions, we won't have time to be covering that today. But I can promise that we won't be asking you to do any editing without our support as the project progresses. That will happen in the workshop stage, where we'll have a professional filmmaker and editor there to support through that part of the process. I've also put some documents about editing with tablets on our school visit Our World website page, which you can access at the one highlighted in red there. And that covers things like using iMovie and KineMaster, which are our recommended apps for Apple and Android, if you're wanting a little bit more information, earlier on in the process. Okay, so today's agenda then. Today we'll be thinking about why we actually storyboard, what a film storyboard is and is not. I'll give us some tips on how we can support pupils in making their own storyboards, some information about shot sequences. I'll then give you some information about different types of camera shots, followed by a post-it note exercise that you can try with your pupils. We'll also have a look at another exercise which you can run with your pupils, which our filmmaker Tim has put together for us. And we'll talk a bit about introducing the UN Sustainable Development Goals to pupils. And just to sort of let you know as well, today's session has been supported by Screen Scotland, which is a kind of the screen education branch of Creative Scotland. So a big thanks to them for all their support and keeping us right with our resources and just being an excellent support and sounding board for these ideas and tasks that we'll talk to you a bit about today. Okay, so why do we storyboard then? Well, firstly, a storyboard allows us to visualize a story. So this is helpful for the whole filmmaking team in your Our World teams, as it helps with planning for the actual filming day. So, ensuring that things like battery and time aren't being wasted during the workshops, and that the whole operation is as streamlined and efficient as it can be. It's also important to keep the storyboard as flexible as possible in the early stages, whilst kind of allowing the group to continue to brainstorm and move things around and change the sort of the sequencing of scenes until they found the most kind of effective order for their shots. So a good way to keep things flexible, as I just mentioned, is by using post-it notes, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Storyboards are really useful for creating shot sequences. In other words, why does shot B follow shot A in order to tell a story? So one thing that is certainly true about film storyboards is the best ones tend to show and not tell. And effectively what we mean by that is that someone who's not heard anything about the film or not been part of the conversation should be able to look at the storyboard and understand what's going on purely just by the images and the small bits of text within the storyboard. Importantly as well, again, in pursuit of kind of efficiency on the day of the shoot, storyboard should also indicate to the team what the camera will be doing in each individual shot. So which angle and camera framing is required and how long will each shot last, for example. So I sent over a camera shot directory to you all in an email earlier this afternoon, which we'll look at these in a bit more detail in a wee bit. But I find that to be a really useful tool to support this element of storyboard creation. A little bit more information about different camera angles and framing techniques, which you can then, which pupils can then employ and put into their storyboards. Okay. So what is a storyboard not then? That's probably a slightly easier way of thinking about things, is turning it on its head a wee bit. So a very common thing that we see in schools is to see pupils put together storyboards, which are just a series of pictures of the camera in long shot, kind of like the example you can see on this slide. It's missing any information about the language of the camera, which camera angle the team want to use, or which type of shot, or how long they want the shot to last. We have received some great Our World entries in previous years that have started off as storyboards not dissimilar to the one you can see here, but we're trying to encourage pupils to really envision themselves making the film on the workshop day, and what will help them most on that day, and also what will how can they clearly show the SEAT team what it is that they have planned for the workshop day itself. So just a sort of side note here, often we get pupils kind of worried about the quality of their drawing. So I also teach geography as well as working for SEAT, and I often find pupils get really put off from tasks that involve some sort of creative input, diagrams or other creative tasks, because they feel that they can't draw and they don't like doing stuff that they feel that they aren't good at, which I can understand. But I always tell them, I'm not expecting, Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, just a simple recreation or a simple sketch is absolutely fine. And that extends to storyboarding as well. So this drawing on the slide that you can see is generally quite effective at expressing what the filmmaker is looking for from the shot, despite the kind of fairly sort of rudimentary drawing. Obviously, we encourage people to put as much effort in as they can and to pursue, a really high quality of work. But artistic talent, or at least perceived talent by them, shouldn't be a deterrent when creating storyboards. I think when it comes to actually sort of sending us their final storyboards, we hope that there'd be a little bit more detail than the kind of stick figures that you can see here, but it's just purely to show that you don't have to be a fantastic artist in order to create a really effective storyboard. Okay, so an effective storyboard or kind of film narrative, which meets that idea of kind of showing, not telling, which we discussed a couple of slides ago, are generally created by designing shots in a sequence that follow a system of active questioning. So in other words, each shot sets up or poses a question, which is then at least partially answered by the following shot. So this kind of keeps the audience on board and interested in the narrative. So, for example, if we look at the 3 examples that we've got below. So in the first shot, you know, the question that the audience member might be asking is, where's this dog going? Why? You know, whose dog is he? We need a bit more information about this dog, but we're already interested in what's going to happen. And then the second shot, you realize, oh, he's bringing someone a letter. And who's that hand we can see? You know, who is it he's bringing this letter to? And then you figure out by shot C that, oh, right, okay, it's his owner. And now you're thinking, oh, I wonder what's in the letter. And, you know, and that continues throughout the whole production, throughout the whole storyboard. So it's all about setting up a question, which is then answered by the following shot. So I mentioned before kind of how useful post-it notes can be when it comes to storyboarding. So this is a useful method as it allows people to sort of move their shots around and to find kind of what works best before committing it to their final page. It also allows them to focus more on the impact of the shot and the camera rather than simply the kind of progression of the story. And this can really help them with, you know, cutting out unnecessary shots. So if I go back to the previous slide just for a moment, just to refer to this one again, there's it's a bit of a sort of aside here, but I think it's quite interesting when thinking about everything being necessary within you know, within each shot. So there's a well-known kind of idea or theory in filmmaking and sort of storytelling called Chekhov's gun theory, which talks about the importance of everything in the story meaning something and it being necessary to the story as a whole and not wasting any space. So Chekhov's gun theory states that if you say in the first chapter that there's a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, the rifle absolutely must go off. So I just think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it through the kind of eye of Chekhov's gun theory. You know, we want every single shot in that storyboard, in the narrative, to be there for a purpose. So back to our post-it notes then. So if we, you know, as we were saying, the using post-it notes allows people to kind of to focus more on the impact of the shot and the camera rather than just the progression of the story, and it helps them to get rid of unnecessary shots, which is just what we're talking about with Chekhov's gun. So a useful tip with this is to color code each shot by location or setting. We're going to think about keeping the story kind of as simple as possible in a moment, but let's say you've got 2 place settings in our world film. It's set over 2 different locations. One of those locations is indoors, one of them's outdoors, for example. You know, having 2 different colors of post-it notes, one, you know, so all the scenes that are shot inside might be in a blue post-it note, and all the scenes shot outside might be a yellow post-it note. That can be really useful for, again, for kind of efficiency and shooting all the outdoor scenes, you know, together at the same point. Remember, as I said, we've only got 2 hours or so on the day to actually film their scenes. So ensuring that they have a kind of plan for the day is so vital. Once again, you know, using these post-it notes, the drawings can be fairly simple and rudimentary. But it's more of a kind of planning device than you know, your final storyboard. This would be used in the kind of very early initial stages of the project. So we have a number of resources that we've specifically kind of curated for the project, and they've been put together by our filmmakers Tim and Alistair, who've worked with a number of times over the years. And they cover things like storyboarding and also story narrative and developing your story narrative. So this is just a sort of example. This is a small section of one of the tutorials that we have available for free on our website and also on our YouTube channel as well. I'm just going to kind of play it to you just now. It's just a couple of minutes long, but it kind of gives you a good idea of a potential task that you could do with your pupils. So I hope that this works. Please tell me if the quality of this is awful. Please tell me.
We'll now move on to an exercise where you will learn how to storyboard to create emotional impact. So the first thing you need to do is create a very short story, or use the following suggestion. You will need to get some actors, or in this case some animated models, to perform the story, and you will need to observe carefully details of the performance. Then you'll have to think about where to place the camera and how to frame the shots so that you tell the story with emotional impact. And then you can create the storyboard. So here's the little simple story that we're going to create a storyboard for. Well, it starts out as a suspense film and ends up as a love story. But how are we going to storyboard it? We can create storyboards using drawings or photographs. For this exercise, we're going to use photographs. We saw in the previous tutorial how most storyboards in schools look like this, just a sequence of long shots with the camera far away and no cuts. So, how could we change this? How could we use different camera placements, different framings to really bring about some emotional impact? At this stage, you don't really need to worry about what the shot is called. You just need to place the camera, frame the shot, and think about why you are doing that. What do you want to show the audience? What do you want to tell them? And what sort of emotion do you want them to feel or see on the screen? So now you've got your story, find yourself a phone or a camera, some Lego models, or if you're lucky, some actors, and work together to find out the best placement for the camera and the actors and the framing of the shot to really tell the emotional story that is in front of you. What can you show the audience to enable them to feel what the actors are feeling? The suspense, the trepidation, the relief, the enjoyment. So I hope you've enjoyed this filmmaking tutorial. If you're interested in more, please explore the SEET website.
Okay, so that's obviously, as I said, there's a couple more where that came from up on our website. There's also another exercise which I find to be really effective if you've got a little bit of time with pupils on this. And that's, Tim provides it's a sort of storyboarding practice exercise, and it uses a Danny McCaskill cycling video from YouTube. And it's kind of similar to that. It's another way of getting the young people to practice these skills. We've also got one by another one of our colleagues, Alistair, who talks a bit about developing story narrative and also using second languages in your films as well. So these are all available at the website. You can see at the bottom there, seat.org.uk/school visit. Okay, so just briefly then, a few wee sort of take-home tips for our world in terms of kind of narrative writing, which I think hopefully should clarify things and simplify things a little bit. So I'd highly recommend that the stories are kept pretty simple, really. So, 2 or 3 main characters and, 1 or 2 place settings or locations. As we've said before, pupils only have a couple of hours on the actual day to shoot this scene, so just keeping things as simple as possible is definitely the best way to go. I would only kind of use more place settings if it can be totally justified within the story. Often imaginations, which is great, imaginations run a little bit wild, and you end up with 6 or 7 different locations in a 3-minute film, and it's kind of hard to keep on top of it all and get it all done. So yeah, just keeping the time setting short, or potentially even just in real time, to avoid overcomplicating, I think is definitely a good way to go. So I emailed everyone the camera shot directory, which is kind of over 2 pages earlier on today. I've also put a link to it in the team here in the chat function, and it's also available on the SEAT website as well. Again, a big thanks to Screen Scotland for their help putting this shot directory together. So we've highlighted a few of the most kind of common camera angles and framing techniques which are used in films. But as with all this stuff, there's no right or wrong way to shoot films. Really, we're just highlighting what we see as effective practice. So that's just the other side of it. So let's run through some of these different shot types a little bit. So you can see that here in the top left, we've got an extreme long shot, which in storyboards are often abbreviated to ELS. And they're often used to establish location at the beginning of a film or to emphasize some kind of isolation in some way. So this example is taken from Star Wars, and it lets the viewer know kind of where Darth Vader is, that he's alone, and knowing him probably plotting something evil. And then we have a long shot in the middle at the top, or LS on storyboards, which is taken in this example from Harry Potter, which is often used to highlight background and the onlookers in the scene to kind of show get the scale of the scene or busyness within the scene, but also keeps the kind of main subject in plain sight, so you can see one of the characters, I think maybe Draco Malfoy over on the left-hand side. We also have a medium shot, top right, or MS for the storyboards, which is taken from the Bourne Legacy here. So medium shots can be really, really effective for dialogue scenes, for example. We've also got a full shot, known as FS, here from Django Unchained in this example, which is often used to do things such as highlight a particular costume or to kind of to show multiple characters at once. Then we've got a close-up, which is obviously one of the most well-known and kind of common camera framing techniques. This is taken from The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, but they can be really, really effective for kind of revealing reactions or showing emotion or intensity within, that the character's feeling in the scene. Then finally, we've got extreme close-up, or ECU, taken from X-Men in this case, which puts emphasis on the kind of the smaller details, and it draws attention to the kind of importance or intensity of what a character is saying or feeling. So these examples are in the camera shot directory with a little explanation of when they're often used as well. On the other side of the camera directory, we also have a bit on camera angles. So camera angles and framing techniques are fairly similar, but there's subtle differences that we'll kind of think about now. So we have an eye level angle here. This is taken from Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. And it's often used to mimic how we see things in real life, or to kind of make the viewer feel like they're right there in the scene with the actors. We've also got a high angle shot taken from Matilda here, which is often used to show some sort of vulnerability or power dynamic at play. That's quite similar. It's the kind of opposite of the low angle shot that we'll look at in a minute. But high angle shots are often used, to show that the character might have, quite an uphill struggle ahead of them, or there's a bumpy road ahead. And as we were saying, you kind of flip that on its head for a low angle shot. It's still often used to show that kind of power dynamic, one character being particularly sort of large and intimidating. So the obvious power dynamic going on here, this is from The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, between the boy and the kind of Nazi commander at the concentration camp. There's obvious power dynamic going on there, and the low angle shot is used really, really effectively to show that that dynamic. From the same film, we also have a bird's eye shot, which can be used to show kind of scale and movement, or it's almost as if like it's God's eyes looking down on the scene below. Then we've got a worm's eye shot, which is often used to highlight kind of something that's going on the ground. And then finally on this diagram, we have what you call a Dutch angle or a tilted angle shot, which I know people have a lot of fun with from previous experience, which can be used to kind of disorientate the viewer, or as if the kind of characters are ill or drunk or something like that. It can also show that something is kind of something's gone a bit wrong, something's a bit confused within the either the character's mind or within the scene itself. And it can be really a really effective way of adding to the kind of dramatic tension of the scene. So again, we have slides and exercises on these camera angles and some others as well, which you can use with your pupils, and they're also available on the SEAT website. So this is an example of one of the ones that we use with pupils on a fairly regular basis. And you can sign up for an online school visit if you want that for your school. You can email me about that, and you can also access these resources on the school visit tab on our website. Okay, so just briefly then, I've kind of showed this before, but when it comes to actually putting the storyboards together, we have a sort of blank storyboard templates available at the website. You can see there, and I think combining what we've kind of just talked about with the camera shot directory, and also a couple of practice exercises that are available for you to use. I think I'm hoping that we'll get some really creative storyboards coming to us by the deadline of the 2nd of December. So they should really things that we're looking for you to include. So obviously we've talked about what framing techniques and camera angles are the pupils going to use. Simple kind of pictures showing what the camera is actually doing in each shot and how long each shot will last. Some sort of indication in the storyboard of which language is going to be used and where in the film they're going to use the languages, and then a concise description of each scene and the kind of camera language underneath the pictures in the lines there. You can use as many of these as these pages as the pupils need or want. But remember, we're aiming for the films to be around the three, no longer than sort of 3.5 minutes really. Okay, so another thing that was requested was to talk a little bit about introducing the Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs or the Global Goals, and think about some ways in which we can introduce these to our pupils, because I know that they can be quite kind of daunting at first, because, well, predominantly because there's so many of them and they're so kind of broad. But let's kind of take a bit of a closer look. So just briefly, as you probably know, there are 17 of these goals, and the point of them is to strive to make the world a kind of better, more peaceful, more prosperous place. So they cover, most walks of kind of modern life, tackling poverty and hunger, climate change action, reducing inequalities, gender equality, to name just a few. So the aim is for these 17 goals to be implemented across the world by the year 2030. And different milestones are kind of used relative to the country's kind of development and that kind of thing to show each country's progress towards the 17 goals. So I've got one eye on the clock. I don't want to keep you guys here for too long, but this should only take a couple minutes. So kind of as with everything in teaching, and as I've mentioned earlier in this presentation, there's absolutely no right or wrong way to talk to pupils about the SDGs or to introduce them. But due to the kind of breadth of them, it's often useful, I find, to spend a period or two in class kind of going through the 17 goals and seeing which ones produce the best the best conversations really. As with all sort of real life topics and teaching more generally, I suppose, making each goal as relatable as possible, I find to be really key. It's often useful, particularly for the purposes of choosing one goal to make a film about for our world, to encourage a discussion about all 17 goals and then get pupils to kind of focus on the one which jumps out most specifically to them. Or to go with one which encourages the most kind of passionate discussion amongst the group. So there's many many ways that you can do this, and that's it's totally up to you. But just a couple of ideas of resources and things that I've sort of been collating over the last little while. We can rank the goals in terms of significance or interest specifically to them. That can be a good way of finding a starting point. You could provide a related stimulus to encourage discussion, such as a photo, a map, a graph, a YouTube clip, maybe a quote from someone significant who the pupils would have heard of. Greta Thunberg, Donald Trump has come up with a good few ones over the years, or someone like that to promote discussion within the class. I was also going to let you know about the teaching resources of our colleagues at ScotDeck, who are a charity that specialise in Sustainable Development Goal education. So the resource is called Explore the Global Goals, 17 Activities for Secondary Schools. And it provides some really, really great ideas, which you can run in your classes. But they also focus on subject-specific areas as well. And for example, they've got an excellent modern languages SDG resource called Issue to Action Modern Languages. And the great thing about ScotDeck as well is that each resource that they post they also provide lots of other sources where you can find other learning and teaching resources, teaching ideas, etc. as well. So this is their website, scotdeck.org.uk/resources, and there's tons in there that you can have a browse and see what works best. So this is just a quick example from their 17 Activities for Secondary Schools resource. This is about SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. So imagine you're going to buy a new mobile phone. How much would the following influence your choice? So consider each of the issues in turn. Stand at different points in a line from one end of the room to the other, depending on how much you would think about that before making your decision. And then there's a sort of list of questions that can get pupils thinking. So where the product was manufactured, how far has it had to travel, the age and type of person making the product, etc., etc. So again, it promotes discussion, gets young people thinking. And another example, this is taken from the same resource. It can potentially inspire young people to explore SDG number 2, which is zero hunger, for example. So this map obviously shows kind of by color the extent, of hunger in these countries. Darker colors showing a higher percentage of population experiencing hunger. So you can use the questions that they've provided there to kind of encourage conversation and make the pupils, think about their own situation and their place as kind of global citizens as well. So from experience, pupils are often really, really impassioned about topics, related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I suppose it's just a matter of finding the topics that get them engaged, and they can lead to some fascinating conversations, particularly when I'm teaching in my other job, when I'm teaching geography. I find these such a broad and engaging sort of stimulus for them. Okay, and of course that consequently leads to much more interesting film ideas as well. Okay, so we also have a page of external resources, which I've put together, which is, again, by our colleagues, including ScotDeck, but other colleagues and partners around the internet. So these resources on this page aren't put together by us, but they're just a kind of compilation of the best stuff that I've found. So that's at seek.org.uk/our-world resources. Okay, so I won't keep you much longer, but just to make it clear what is available to pupils on the actual day of the filmmaking workshop, just so that there's no kind of confusion. So pupils will have a brand new 2023 iPad, which they can use on the workshop day. Pupils will use iMovie to edit their films, but as we mentioned previously, there'll be a professional filmmaker and editor there to kind of provide tuition about actually editing with iPads. So unfortunately, we don't have time to do a bit on that today, but that's for another time. All props and costumes will need to be brought with pupils to the workshop space. it'd be great to have, a huge sort of costume box or something like that. But we, as it stands, pupils will need to bring anything extra like that with them. Pupils will have access to the whole space where the workshop is taking place. And they'll also have the chance to shoot outside as well, as long as they're with an adult. But that kind of, all the more reason to keep the setting nice and simple, because the workshops usually take place either in kind of office buildings or, university buildings, that kind of thing. And they have access to the whole space where they are, but, you're relatively limited in that regard in terms of, we've had some fantastic entries over the years of, people getting super creative with their backgrounds and their locations. But I think just for ease, it's good to encourage a kind of simpler story. We like participants to be incredibly resourceful and creative whenever they can, and we encourage sort of experimentation. But yeah, it's a lot easier. And there is a green screen available on the day, but obviously that's going to be shared with a few groups. So I wouldn't rely too kind of heavily on the green screen for the actual day itself. So final tips then before I open up to any questions, if there are any. So try using post-it notes for storyboarding. It's a great, really effective way of allowing the pupils to kind of experiment with their idea, move things around, change things. Try practicing with your classes, again, with the exercises that are in Tim's video. There are 2 of them posted on our website. Make sure to indicate the language of the camera in the storyboard. So, camera movement, shot type, shot duration, etc. As well as thinking about the language of the camera, please make sure pupils also do plan the second language element of their film before coming to the workshop. Again, just because of time pressures on the day. Color and neatness are less important than the ideas in storyboarding. That's just a kind of key thing. Someone who hasn't been involved in the conversation should really be able to figure out how the film's going to look without any explanation, just by looking at the storyboard alone. Remember what resources pupils will have on the day so that they don't kind of go too over the top with their planning. And I would just say, just finally, keep it simple. Okay, so if you've got any questions or you want to discuss anything, you've got an opportunity now, or you can also contact me whenever you want on alex@seat.org.uk, or you can message us Seat on Twitter or on Facebook, or you can give us a ring on 0131 557 9886. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon, everyone. I'll now take any questions if there are any in the chat box. Thanks very much. Okay, Caitlin has a question, I think.
Hi Alex, sorry, I missed the first CLPL session, so you probably answered that then and there, so I'm playing a bit of catch up. But when roughly do you reckon the workshops will be and where?
Yeah, no problem. So the workshops normally take place throughout kind of February and March, and we're still to confirm the dates, but we'll be aiming for February and March for the workshops, and where we normally spread them in various locations around Scotland in order to accommodate for schools all over the country. So our normal schedule is we'll have one in Edinburgh, one in Glasgow, and one in Aberdeen. But I mean, last year we ended up doing one in Elgin because it suited some Aberdeenshire and Angus schools a little bit better. So these details are relatively flexible. It just kind of depends on where we are in sort of February. But yeah, it'll be throughout February and March that the workshops will run.
Okay, super. Thanks very much.
No problem. In the chat function, see if anyone has asked any questions. Can we get a copy of presentation? Absolutely, yep. So this session has been recorded, so I'll be posting it on YouTube either tonight or tomorrow morning, however long it takes to load it up. But I'll also send you the actual PowerPoint itself as well, Mark. That's no problem. The slides, yeah, no problem at all. I'll make sure that's sent over to you. So again, just for our sort of our world specific resources, yeah, you can go on our website, which is seek.org.uk, and then if you kind of hover over the Our World tab at the top, there's a drop down menu, and there's the Our World resources page, which is kind of compiled from around the internet, and then on the school visit page, you know, you can access our more sort of seat specific resources. Yeah, maybe I'll stay on for a minute or two if anyone has any other questions. But if not, then thank you very much for your time today. And I look forward to working with you all. And as I said, I'm available whenever. If you have any questions, you want to email me or give us a ring, that's no problem at all.